أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين واللعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ كنتم أعداء فألف بين قلوبكم فأصبحتم بنعمته إخوانا وكنتم على شفا حفرة من النار فأنقذكم منها كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته لعلكم تهتدون صلوات الله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Tonight is our fourth night in our series Orthodox Islam, and I am immensely grateful to all of you for the feedback I am receiving from you. Much of it is in appreciation that we are able to discuss issues that are sensitive and contentious with respect, and yet with the ability to discuss them candidly. There are, however, some concerns that are raised as well and brought to my attention, and I wish to address them before we continue from where we left off last night as questions perhaps. One of the concerns is that last night when discussing the idea that there are principles in the Aqidah of the Shi'as that insulate them from being radicalized, or at least as easily as the non-Shia, not as easily. This seems to have been misunderstood and misinterpreted as my saying that the Sunni brothers are terrorists and the Shias are not. So I want to reiterate what I said last night. I think I said it very clearly last night that of the millions and millions of Muslims, 99.99% of them are not terrorists, Shia and Sunni. And I also mentioned that if you look at all the various terrorist groups that we talk about, whether it is the Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab in Africa, or the Sipahi Sahaba in Pakistan, or Al-Qaeda and Taliban and ISIS in the Middle East, we can't help but notice that they all seem to subscribe to one ideology, and it is the ideology of Wahhabism or Salafism. Now, this is not an accusation, this is a fact. It is not something that anyone should be shocked to hear. Having said that, I want to also add to that not every individual who calls himself Salafi is violent and extremist. You will meet individuals who call themselves Salafi, who practice the Salafi manhaj, but are completely opposed, and many of them are completely opposed to violence. I don't know what their view is about the Shia, whether they consider them Muslims or not, but the mere fact that the Shia are permitted to go for Hajj tells us that not all of them consider us to be kuffar. My point was not the fact that we are not terrorists and others are. My point was that those who seek to cause mischief, they prey upon Muslims, and when they prey upon Muslims, they seek the path of least resistance, and when they do that, they look for those who can be radicalized more easily. And if we speak of Orthodox Islam, there are some principles that we have found from the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam that are missing in the mainstream Orthodox, in the mainstream Islam. And so if we can restore those principles, then as I said last night, it is not an attempt to proselytize or convert and say we want all the Sunnis to become Shia or us versus them. It is to say that the Ummah as a whole needs to acknowledge the need for adala, for justice, the fact that the end does not justify the means, the fact that in Islam, just because someone hurts your loved ones and commits injustices, you cannot retaliate in like manner. And some of these ideas that appeal easily to those who are taken advantage of and radicalized is the result of centuries of indoctrination by those who ruled over Islam as dynasties. And so that's the point that I've been trying to make. You will notice that in the media, when they speak of terrorism, besides all these groups, the media will often speak of Iran as being a state sponsor of terrorism. But if you are an honest historian, or just, you don't even need to be a historian, if you are honest about this and you study current affairs, you find that this labeling of Iran as terrorist is only because of the issue of Israel and Palestine. It is driven by the fact that Iran stands up for the Palestinian people and objects to the atrocities committed against them. And in that regard, Iran supports Hezbollah. And it is for this reason that they are being labeled terrorists. If tomorrow Iran was to say, we have nothing to do with the Palestinian people, then you can be rest assured they will be removed from that blacklist of terrorists. But you don't see groups of Iranians in Africa, in Pakistan, in Middle East, here and there, in small bands and groups led by one individual, causing, acts of terror and suicide bombing and so on and so forth. Now, you might say that, well, if Shias are not terrorists, neither are Sunni. And I totally agree with that. But the issue, as I said, is the discussion around where are we most susceptible and why is radicalization prone to certain groups of individuals and certain madhabs and certain aqidas. The other comment I've received is that you are wrong in ascribing even the idea that terrorism is found in groups that call themselves Salafi or Wahhabi, because terrorism has nothing to do with religion, it has to do with politics. And once again I say I agree, it has nothing to do with religion, it has to do with politics. But those who commit these acts, whatever their political motivations are, whether it's to have control over others, whether it is financial, economic, whatever it is, they are using religion to serve their political purposes. It may not have anything to do with religion, but religion is being used. It is being done in the name of religion. Today the Buddhists are committing a lot of acts of terror against Muslims. But why are they not being labeled as terrorists? Why are only Muslims being labeled terrorists? It is because of the proliferation of groups in the name of Islam all over the globe, where if they're suppressed in one place, they show up in another. So it may not have anything to do with religion, but religion is being used. Now, if religion is being used, then as an ummah, we need to find where in our ummah is the weak link, and then we need to plug that hole and find out what is missing in that sector of the ummah. If it is the concept of adala, if it is the concept of leadership, then we need to address that as an ummah. So we need to ask that when they are misusing Islam, which version of Islam are they misusing, and why? Why are they finding it easier to recruit individuals from that particular segment of the ummah? And that is all that I was trying to say last night. I want to also once again state it is in no way my intent to offend anyone, and I totally understand that in my audience here there are individuals who are not from the Shia madhab, and there are individuals who are Shia but have family members who are not Shia. They have spouses, they have in-laws, they have parents. One parent may be Shia, one may not be. It is customary at the end of every series of lectures that the speaker will apologize and say, if during the course of this I have said anything to offend anyone, then I apologize. I'm going to apologize from now, because I will say things even tonight and going forward that will not necessarily be palatable to all of us. But I trust that you will give some allowances to my sincerity, that what I seek is not to hurt anyone's feelings or to cause division in the ummah, but rather to say we need to talk about these things, because these are issues, and we cannot speak of the future unless we understand our past. We need to understand how did the ummah If we want to understand why the Ummah is in the state it is today, we need to understand how we were governed and what things were made sacred that shouldn't have been made, and what things were removed from being sacred that were meant to be sacred in Islam. So I think that makes it very clear. The other issue was to recognize that when we speak of tashayyu, there is also an immense amount of good and contribution that we get from the Sunni Muslim community as well. It is important that I mention this to my Shia brothers and sisters as well, that in the past, until the rise of Salafism and when Saudi Arabia began claiming to be the spokespeople for the Sunni community in the past, when the center of Sunni world was Egypt and Al-Azhar, there was a tremendous amount of cooperation between the Shia and Sunni community. And even prior to that, when you study the history of Islam, you will find that even though the government was against the Shia and the Ahlul Bayt through all the centuries, at an individual level, the Shia and Sunni ulama worked very closely together. Many of our most famous Shia ulama and giants as well have studied under Sunni teachers like Shaykh al-Mufid. You hear of debates Shaykh al-Mufid had with his teacher who was a Sunni. If you look at the tafsir Tha'alabi, for example, he quotes a lot from Majma'ul Bayan, which is a Shia source. And there is, for example, a very famous muhaddith amongst the Shia who was called Ibn Uqda. He's one of the earliest muhaddithun and was an expert in hadith transmission and ilmul rijal and so on. Some of the Sunni critics of his time who spoke against Shia, they had immense respect for him because of his knowledge of hadith. So we have individuals like Daraqutni and Ibn Adi. Many of you may not be familiar with these names, and As-Subqi and so on. These are giants in the Sunni world. They used to describe Ibn Uqda as one of the hadith masters of the Sharia. He was a man that records say had memorized or was familiar with close to 850,000 ahadith, of which 3,000 was only on the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And here is the amazing thing. They used to seek his opinion and respect his opinion in hadith, but he was a staunch Shia and very often he used to disparage Abu Bakr and Umar. But they still held him in very high regard because of his knowledge of hadith. So there has been that history of knowledge. If you look at, for example, one of our great works in spirituality is by Mullah Faith Kashani, Al-Mahajjatul Bayda. Al-Mahajjatul Bayda was a recension on Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin. He took Ghazali's work and he rewrote it. And wherever Ghazali quoted from Sunni sources, from Bukhari and Muslim, and quoted Abu Huraira and others, he removed all that and he put Qala al-Baqir, Qala al-Sadiq, and he wrote his footnotes and comments on where he agreed and disagreed with Ghazali. So it is in no way to say that there is nothing that the Sunni world offers us. We are one ummah, we are one nation, and I said this on day one, that if leadership would have remained in the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, what you would have had today is the same ummah as Muslim, and within that ummah there would have been a group that would have been identified as Shi'as, not a separate group or a separate sect in there. Now, picking up from where we left last night, we were looking at the first issue that Muslims find objectionable amongst the Shia, and that is the issue of Sahaba. And I just want to say a few lines and then wrap that up and move on from that. I mentioned that Muslims regard Bukhari as being absolutely authentic, but there are traditions in Bukhari that, at least to our understanding, contradicts the Quran. And because Muslims created this aura of sacredness around this, that there cannot be any fault in this book, it is causing a downstream effect. Now, I went and looked into this further today to say, why is the work of Bukhari being held with such, feverish zeal that there cannot be anything wrong in it? There is a scholar in the US, an academic, Dr. Jonathan Brown, who converted to Islam in '97 and became a humbly Sunni Muslim. He's a professor at Georgetown University, and he is well respected. He's not too old actually, he's young, probably around the age of 40 right now, and He is the editor-in-chief of the Oxford Encyclopedia on Islam and Law, and he has some very interesting works on Hadith. His specialization is in Hadith. He's got a book that is called Hadith, Muhammad's Legacy in the Medieval and Modern World. And he's got another book called Misquoting Muhammad, The Challenge and Choices of Interpreting the Prophet's Legacy, and so on. In his book Misquoting Muhammad, he discusses why Bukhari is held with such sacredness. He says that at the time of Imam Ghazali, there was a time when Ghazali was teaching Hadith in Algeria. And one day a student came to Ghazali's class looking very concerned and perplexed. He said to Ghazali, I want to ask you about a hadith in Bukhari that is troubling me. The hadith is that at the time that the Prophet Musa alayhi salam was to leave this world, and the angel of death came to take the soul of Musa alayhi salam, Bukhari says in a hadith that Musa alayhi salam punched Malakul Maut with such force that one of the eyeballs of Malakul Maut popped out. Now this student was very disturbed that how could such a tradition have come to Bukhari's work. And remember what we said, Imam Bukhari, for every hadith he prayed 2 rakats. And remember that you could put your marriage online to vouch for Bukhari's authenticity. And there is nothing under the canopy in the heavens more authentic than Bukhari after the Quran. Dr. Jonathan Brown says that Ghazali evaded the question and said to the student, you are distracted with trivial matters. This is a time when Muslim Ummah has been encircled by enemies, and you are concerned about this hadith? Now remember, Ghazali lived in the 12th century. He died 1111. So being encircled by enemies has not really changed a lot, even after several centuries. Now Dr. Brown says, what Ghazali did by telling him this was to evade the question. Now he goes into a discussion to say why. He says, you see, there were many people collecting hadith in the early days of Islam. But there was this concern that there was a lot of fabrications. What Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim did was they began a science where they discussed the criteria and basis on which you determine whether a hadith is true or false. So it was like a formula or a filter, and if you push a hadith into that machine, it checks and filters, and if it comes out with a green light, it's hadith, it's sahih. And that criteria became solidified, which is why the books became so valuable to Muslims, because others were not creating this sort of a criteria. And others after them began using that. So for example, Al-Hakim Al-Nisaburi has a work called Al-Mustadrak ala As-Sahihain. He collected 9,000 plus ahadith called Al-Mustadrak on the basis of Sahihain. And he said, I have collected these traditions on the shara'it, on the conditions that Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim established as this is how we're going to determine what is authentic and what is not. And the Sharia for the Muslim majority came to be on this basis, and therefore the work of Bukhari and Muslim became foundational to Muslims. Now, if you question anything in Bukhari and Muslim, you not only question the hadith, but you question the criteria and basis on which the whole Sharia depends, and therefore the whole edifice begins to collapse. On the Shia side, it was different because they took Sharia from the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Now I quote word for word Dr. Jonathan Brown's book, Misquoting Muhammad. He quotes a famous Sunni scholar in the United States called Zaid Shakir. Many of you may have heard of Imam Zaid Shakir. He's a well-known preacher in the United States. He says, Imam Zaid Shakir once noted, word for word this is, if you knock out Sahih Bukhari, you knock out the Sharia. So this is the issue. Now, when I wrap up this subject of Sahaba, I want to once again say that Shias are not anti-Sahaba. Shias are not bent or established on the idea that we reject the Sahaba. What the Shias are saying is, There may have been reasons, there may have been circumstances under which we built a foundation as Muslims. From a Shia perspective, that was because we left the door of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Whatever has happened, there have been centuries. But none of these are infallibles. And there is no hadith of the Prophet or anything in Quran to vouch for these individuals like it vouches for the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. The Prophet, for example, said, I leave behind the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, my itra. This is a sahih hadith from Shia and Sunni perspective. So he is stamping and vouching for the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. The Quran vouches for their isma and tahara, that no rijs can come near them. But there is nothing in Quran or hadith that vouches for Imam Abu Hanifa or Imam Shafi or Imam Bukhari, or to say there will only be 4 firqas in Islam and so on. So it should not be beyond open to discussion and debate. And if we are not open to doing that, then we will continue suffering as we do, because there are traditions in our books that will continue influencing our ethos and our mindsets. Before this problem of ISIS and so on in the Middle East, when we were able to freely go for ziyarah, I remember that if you went for ziyarah to Syria, outside Damascus, they would take you for ziyarah of an eminent companion, Hujr bin Adi. Hujr bin Adi was killed by Muawiyah. And there would be a guide who would take you to all these ziyarat of atraf. And when they would bring you to the grave of Hujr bin Adi, these are the exact words the guide would tell you. And I'm showing you now the mindset of the Muslims because of how we have created this sacredness around we cannot criticize anything to do with Sahaba, with Bukhari, stay with the majority. Right? The guide who takes you to the qabr of Hujr bin Adi, he would tell you, هذا قبر سيدنا هجر بن عدي رضي الله عنه الذي قتلوه سيدنا معاوية رضي الله عنه. This is the grave of our master Hujr bin Adi, may Allah be pleased with him, who was murdered by our master Muawiyah, may Allah be pleased with him. So qatil is radiyallah, maqtul is radiyallah. This is the problem that Shias have. I mentioned this issue of Abu Sufyan and Abu Talib. When we reject saying we can't accept everyone, especially if you're going to define Sahaba as anyone who saw the Prophet even once in his lifetime as a Muslim, you cast a very huge net. And the issue of justice is now thrown out of the window. Now it doesn't matter if the Prophet is being portrayed as a violent man. It doesn't matter if the Zalim is also being included as Sahaba. The insistence is that you stay with the majority, that you don't change what is set, and that you don't question it. So this is where we are asking for dialogue. It is not to offend or to hurt anyone. Now, I think that is sufficient with the issue of Sahabiyat. Let's move on and talk about the other issues that Muslims raise as concerns with regards to the Shia. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad. I have taken almost 2 or 3 nights discussing the issues of Sahaba because that is the main issue. For the rest of the issues, I hope to complete them all tonight. I am, in terms of the content I have in mind for 12 nights, I am behind by approximately 2 lectures. So I will have to consolidate some matters. I mentioned in one of the early nights that if you take everything that is said to be objectionable with the Shia, you can group them in 3. Lies and misconceptions, matters related to ahkam and fiqh, and matters related to aqaid and theology. The issues that we talked about as being lies and misconceptions, the first was this misconception that the Shias are anti-Sahaba, which we have talked about. The other misconception is that the Shias worship their Imams. This is a lie. The Shias do not do that. The other misconception is, now this is the one that is really hard to convince anyone with. The Shias are taught to lie and hide their faith because they have this concept called taqiyya. So if a Shia tells you anything, such as we don't worship our Imams, don't believe him, he's lying. So it becomes a chicken and egg thing, because then now I could go blue in the face telling you I don't worship Amir al-Mu'mineen, but if you are not willing to trust me, then your response would be, nah, this is taqiyya, don't believe you. Now, taqiyya is mentioned in the Quran in chapter 16, verse 106. And many of you know this, that one of the most eminent companions of the Prophet ﷺ, Ammar Yasir, his parents were the first martyrs in Islam, and his father and mother were murdered right before his eyes. They tortured them, they tied ropes on their legs, like his mother, they tied ropes on each leg, and they tied it to 2 horses, and they sent the horses in 2 directions to tear her body apart. And he was tied to a post while he was watching. And his father was stabbed in the stomach. So, when they came to him now, and they said he should acknowledge the idols and give up the deen of Muhammad, he said words to acknowledge the idols. And they let him go. As soon as they let him go, he came running to the Prophet while he was crying. The Prophet ﷺ asked him, what was in your heart? He said, in my heart I had absolute faith and commitment. I said it only to save my life. To which this verse was revealed, verse 16, 106, to say it is only those who become faithless after faith that are to be condemned. But those who say words of kufr, but their faith is intact to save their lives, then there is no harm in that. In fact, it is obligatory to save your life. And I mentioned yesterday or day before that Bukhari mentions that from Abu Darda, who says that we used to smile on the face of some of the other companions, but in our hearts we used to curse them. And Bukhari mentions that taqiyya is valid ila yawm al-qiyamah. Now, when you look at the history of the Shia, you can't deny that we have always been persecuted. In the early days, our Imams were persecuted. In the later days, we were persecuted. Right? During the time of the Umayyads, individuals like Hajjaj bin Yusuf, they not only killed eminent companions like Kumail ibn Ziyad and Qambar and Sa'id bin Jubair, but they killed thousands and thousands of Sadat. During the time of the Banu Abbas, Mutawakkil killed hundreds of thousands of Shi'as and Sadat. He used to ask for the Sadat to be buried alive while he was watching. So they would build a pillar and they would put a person in, or they would lay him down and they would put cement and blocks, and he would want to watch while they cover him up so that he is buried alive. Now, a lot of the Sadat fled and they moved out of the Middle East and they went to Iran, they went to the Middle East, they went to Egypt, they went to other places, which is why you have a large community today that are Sunni but are Sayyids, and they use the term Sharif. And a lot of them are Hassanis. And the reason they are Hassanis is because after the Battle of Karbala, Imam Zainul Abidin and the Imams after him who were descendants of Imam al-Hussein did not rise and take a stand in fighting against the rulers of the time. But the descendants of Imam Hassan continued to fight against the rulers. And so they were targeted and a lot of Hassanis were killed. And so a large number of Hassanis fled from the Middle East and moved to other places. And you have all heard of incidents of Sadat who went to places where they lived amongst Muslims who were not Shia, and they were so afraid to disclose that they were Shia and Sayyids. They couldn't even tell their own children, because when the children went to school or madrasa, they might accidentally divulge, because of which they would be killed. And it is only generations later that people would discover scrolls in which they would look at their shajar and they would realize that we are actually descendants of the Prophet and we were originally Shia. And that is why you will find a lot of the Sunni Muslims as well who are descendants from the Prophet. They have immense love for the Ahlul Bayt and a close attachment, and they speak of him in lofty terms of the Ahlul Bayt. But they were raised with the Sunni manhaj, so in their fiqh and so on, they follow that madhab. Now, because of this brutal history that we have had of always being victims, we have been forced to practice taqiyya. Taqiyya is actually the exact opposite of nifaq. The accusation is you Shia are hypocrites because you practice nifaq. Nifaq is that on your lips you claim to have faith, but in your heart you don't have faith. Taqiyya is on your lips you claim you don't have faith, but in your heart you have faith. It's the exact opposite actually of nifaq. So, and also I should add that prominent members of the Shia community are not permitted to practice taqiyya, because if they practice taqiyya, then the community can go astray. So Imam al-Hussein, for example, could not practice taqiyya. He could not say, I'll do bay'ah of Yazid, just at face value, but in my heart I don't accept him. If I was living at the time, and let's say, wal-iyadhu billah, I wasn't going to help Imam al-Hussein, but I rejected Yazid, I could have said that, yeah, I'll do bay'ah, just to save my life. But he could not, because if he would do it, then then Islam is in jeopardy. So that is why you see that sometimes eminent ulama in the Shia community, Shaheed Baqir al-Sadr, Sheikh Nimr, so on, they speak up. They can easily do taqiyya and save their lives. But they cannot, because if they keep quiet, others will go astray. So Shias do not use taqiyya as a form of hypocrisy. If a Shia tells you, I don't worship the Imams, he truly does not worship the Imams. The other accusation is the Shias believe that their Imams control the universe. There are extremists in all religions, and there are some amongst the Shia. But the important thing to keep in mind is that the Shia believe that any power an Imam has is not independent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, we don't have the opportunity to go into a detailed discussion and bahath from a Quran perspective, but you can prove from the Quran that even though Allah has ilmul ghaib, He gives this hidden knowledge to whomever He pleases. Even though Allah is qadirul mutlaq, but He gives this power to whomever He pleases. He gave Jesus, peace be on Him, the power to fashion a bird from clay and blow into it, and it would come to life. He gave Him the power to bring the dead back to life. Now, if you say Isa alayhi salam brought the dead back to life, it is not shirk unless you believe that Isa alayhi salam could do it even if Allah did not will it. But Allah says in the Quran that you brought the dead back to life bi'idhni, with my permission. So we speak of our Imams as Imams who are وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا. They are Imams who guide others under our command. And we made them Imams when they showed sabr and when they showed yaqeen. So anything that the Shias say about their Imams that seems elevated, it is on the basis of with Allah's will, with Allah's permission, and empowerment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The issue of shafa'ah and wasila, I will not go into that detail because the vast majority of Sunni Muslims believe in that as well. Except for the Salafis, Sunni Muslims vastly and majority believe in the intercession of the Prophet ﷺ and in the shafa'ah of the Prophet. The Shias have their own Quran. Now, in Arabic or in Islamic terms, the term that is used for any belief that the Quran has been changed is called tahrif, interpolation, that anything has been added, removed, or changed. I have read on tahrif extensively, and I have looked at all the ahadith in Sunni and Shia sources regarding tahrif. And I say this to you sincerely, my dear brothers and sisters, there are more traditions supporting tahrif in Sunni books of hadith than there are in Shia. And you don't have to take my word for it. But what is important to remember is the Shia and Sunni unanimously agree that there is no change in the Quran and that all these traditions are to be rejected. We have, for example, a very popular idea. Many Sunni reports say that the Caliph Umar insisted that there is an ayah in Quran with regards to stoning those who commit zina. And he called it the ayatul rajm. Rajm is to stone. And in this ahadith, the Caliph Umar recited that ayah in Arabic. It's there as well in hadith, to say this ayah was part of the Quran. But no Muslim today believes it is part of the Quran. There is a hadith from Tabarani, another famous muhaddith amongst the Sunni. He quotes a hadith to say that the Caliph Umar said that the Quran had 1,027,000 letters. And if you count the letters of the Quran, it is not even 1/3 of this, which means according to that hadith of the Caliph Umar, 2/3 of the Quran is missing. There is another hadith from al-Mu'minin Aisha that says that Surah Al-Ahzab was much larger than what it is today. And there are many other traditions to say that many chapters of the Quran are missing. But no Muslim today will accept that the Quran is incomplete. So you must therefore give the Shia the same benefit of the doubt when they say that any tradition you find in Shia literature that says the Quran is incomplete is not true. Some of the traditions, the ulama have explained it differently. For example, if you see a hadith from Imam al-Baqir or Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, and he says this ayah is not like this, it is like this, you will find scholars like Allama at-Tabatabai will explain and say what the Imam meant is the interpretation, the tafsir, the ta'wil of this ayat is not how the mainstream Muslims interpret it, but it is like this. Or for example, this popular idea that Imam Ali alayhi salam has his own Quran and that he wrote a Quran and he offered it to the Muslims and they refused to accept it. The understanding of, there may be some groups amongst the Shia who truly believe this, that it's a different Quran, and the belief that when the Mahdi alayhi salam comes, he will bring this Quran forward. But if you speak to the ulama, if you speak to someone like Ayatollah Sistani, for example, or Sayyid al-Khuy, for example, the understanding is that yes, Imam Ali had compiled a separate Quran, but what was different in that is he may have compiled it in the order of revelation. So the Quran we have today is not organized in the order that it was revealed. The first surah verses to be revealed was from Surah Al-Iqra, which is not the opening surah. The Quran right now is organized where the longer chapters are first, like Surah Al-Baqarah and Ali Imran and so on, except for Surah Al-Fatih at the start, and the shorter ones are all at the end. Imam Ali may have compiled it in the order in which it was revealed. Plus, he may have put a lot of glossaries and comments and commentaries explaining the exact meaning of that Quran, which would have been handed down from Imam to Imam and which would be brought forth to bring the true original meaning of the Quran. But what is the proof that the Shias do not have their own Quran? The proof is that first of all, the Quran itself in chapter 15 verse 9 says, إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. It is we that have revealed this reminder, and it is we that are its protectors. It is we that shall protect it. So anyone who says the Quran is altered has immediately contradicted this verse of the Quran. Secondly, in Shia fiqh, when you pray salat, you have to recite a complete surah of Quran. In the Sunni madhab, you don't. You can read a portion or a few verses, but in Shia, you have to read a complete surah. Now, if there were surahs that were incomplete, then we would have had hadith from our Imams that would say, when you pray salat, you cannot recite these surahs because they're not complete. But there is no surah that you cannot recite except perhaps the surahs that have the wajib sajda. And there are two surahs, two sets at the end where they are seen to be together. When you read one, you read the other. But otherwise, the Quran is complete. There have been a lot of attempts in the past to blame the Shias of having their own Quran. And many of you, if you Google this, you will find it. There was an attempt at one point to say the Shias have this extra surah called Suratul Wilaya. And this was a forged surah that was written up as Suratul Wilaya. And it was put into a copy of the Quran, published, and it was planted in a Shia mosque. And the whole thing was set up. And then it was caught, it was divulged, and there is a whole story to it. But you can rest assuredly walk into any Shia masjid anywhere in the world and pull up a Quran from any shelf without announcing, and you will not find it to be any different. In fact, outside Iran, I think most of the Shia masajid, the Quran is probably not even published from a Shia country or a Shia, maybe in Iraq as well. But if you were to pick up a Quran in the masjid here, it is most likely printed either in Pakistan or Saudi Arabia. So this is again a lie and a misconception. Another lie is that the Shias believe if you love and follow the Imams, you don't need to pray and you will go to Jannah. You don't have to pray or fast. Ali ki muhabbat kafi hai. Kullu Shia Jannah. You go to your qabr, if you don't pray, you don't fast, doesn't matter. As long as you love Ali, you love Hussein, you'll go to Jannah. This is a lie. Why? Because the hadith of the Imams themselves reject it. Forget about not praying. If you take your prayers lightly, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi says, He says, لا تنال شفاعتنا مستخفا بالصلاة. Our intercession will not reach the one who takes his prayer lightly. And a long, long time ago, very long, maybe 17, 18 years ago, I had once delivered a lecture in which I demonstrated that every single Imam, towards the end of their lives or when they were passing away, they mentioned Salat. That Salat, Salat, Salat. And you be the best in observing Sharia and upholding it. That is how you become an adornment for us. Kunu lana zaynan wa la takunu lana shayna. No one should point to my Shia, the Imams wanted and said, and say that, look, the Shias are fasiq. They should point at you and say, if there is anyone who is adamant about practicing Sharia, it is these, the followers of Jafar as-Sadiq. So this is emphasis. The other lie about the Shias is that the Shias were originally an extremist group. And then over time, in order to survive, they sobered and they kind of watered things down. And they removed extremist elements and kind of took a little from here and there and became now part of some madhab that is worthy of a second look at. Now, here I want to quote something that is very interesting. If you go to the university to stay and take a course on Shia Islam, even University of Toronto, they will use a standard textbook called An Introduction to Shi'i Islam by Mujan Momin. Mujan Momin, he criticizes many things and so on, but at one point he writes something very interesting, and I quote verbatim here. He says, the very term ghullat dates after the time of as-Sadiq. That ghulu is extremism. He says the very term ghulu and ghullat, it only came about after the time of as-Sadiq, not before that. Now listen to this. And all the modern academic scholarly research has produced very little evidence that, regardless of what the followers may have said or thought, the Imams themselves did not say or think anything different from what present-day mainstream Shias think and practice. Perhaps you didn't catch that. Let me tell you what he's saying. He says, despite all the academic research we have done, there is very little evidence to show that there is any difference between the hadith of the Imams and what the Shia practice today. So here is the issue. If Shias had been extremists, then they would have fabricated traditions of extremism and attributed it to their Imams. And then over time, when Shias watered down their extremism and made it more mainstream, what you would have found today is that the Shias are not extremists, but the hadith about their Imams, the ones that they call Sahih hadith, would have shown signs of that extremism. But what he's saying is, there is nothing extreme in the hadith of Al-Baqir and As-Sadiq, and there is nothing extreme in the Shia today. Therefore, any extremism was something that rose over time as an anomaly, as something separate that rose and fell, and that exists separate from mainstream tashayyu. But there is a consistency between what the Shias practice and believe today and what their Imams taught centuries ago. And that in itself is proof that tashayyu was never extreme, and that the Imams always rejected those who ascribed divinity to them and spoke of extremism with regards to them. The other misconception or lie imputed to the Shias is the issue of visiting graves of the Imams and building shrines over them. As far as visiting graves is concerned, all Muslims agree to that. Even the Salafis have a hadith that they support, that the Prophet ﷺ used to encourage Muslims to go and visit the graves because it reminds them of the hereafter. And there is a hadith in Bukhari and others to say that the Prophet ﷺ went to visit his mother's grave. Now there is an issue of contention there, because they use an ayah of Quran where they say that the tafsir of that ayat is the Prophet ﷺ went to his mother's grave with companions and he cried at his mother's grave. And when they asked him why he was crying, he said, I asked Allah to ask for forgiveness for my mother, but he refused me because she wasn't a Muslim when she died. So then I asked Allah if I could at least go visit her grave, and he allowed me. So he went to visit the grave. And based on that, it is permissible to visit graves. So visiting graves is not an issue. As far as building of shrines is concerned, again, mainstream Muslims don't have an issue with this. In Sunni Islam, there is a lot of shrines for Sufi saints, for example. And generally in Islam, again, it is a bahath, a discussion, but it doesn't need to be dealt with right now. And it is not a reason for which you might say Shias are not Muslims because of this. The other lie that we've mentioned time and again is that Shiaism was started by a Jew named Abdullah bin Sabah. One of our greatest historian, Allama Murtaza Askari, that I mentioned earlier, who has written 3 volumes on Aisha, he has written a work on Abdullah bin Sabah, and he has done extensive research on every single report, narration, anything you can find on Abdullah bin Sabah, and he has proven he is a fictitious figure. There never existed anyone by the name of Abdullah bin Sabah. So this was another lie that was created again against the Shia. The other issue that is rejected, that is raised as a concern that why Shias cannot be Muslims, is they say anyone who does not believe in the Khilafat of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Muawiyah and Yazid cannot be a Muslim. Now this is more from the Salafi side, because the Sunni Muslims, wouldn't say this regarding Yazid. The issue here first is that Yazid being a Muslim is also questionable. Apart from being Sharibul Khamr and being a gambler and drinking wine and womanizing and all that, there is record of his poetry. Like for example, when the qafila is brought before him of Imam Zain al-Abidin and the Ahlul Bayt before him, there are words that he sings while he is drunk, in which he says, Layta ashyakhin bi badrin shahidu. If only my forefathers who were killed in Badr by Ali were here, they would have said to me, in our language, Shabash, or Yazid, for what you have done. And then these are the words of Yazid. He says, لعبت حاشم بالملك فلا خبر جاء ولا وحي نزل. The Banu Hashim played a game because there was no revelation that was ever sent. Nothing ever came down from Allah. They just made this all up in order to have power. These are the words of Yazid. How does this then become a measure and a yardstick for saying who is a Muslim and who is not? Now, let's reduce that scope and say those who say that Shias are not Muslim because they reject the first 3 caliphs. Here, what we say is we're not trying to fight this as us versus you and who's right and who's wrong. All we're saying is this the reason for Shias to be rejected as being Muslims? The first issue is that Muslims say that the Prophet ﷺ never appointed a successor. If the Prophet ﷺ never appointed a successor, and therefore there is nothing in Quran or Hadith to say that the first caliph in Islam has to be Abu Bakr, then where is the dalil and the proof to say that this is going to be the measure and the yardstick of Iman and Kufr? I can argue for the case of Ali bin Abi Talib on the basis of Ghadir, for example, or on the basis of Da'watul Ashira, that the Prophet ﷺ said, Man kuntu mawlahu fahada aliyun mawla. And this is a mutawatir hadith that nobody can reject. We could argue about the meaning of mawla. But there is no hadith from the Prophet ﷺ to say that the first, second, third caliph have to be this. And therefore, if an individual says, I don't accept them as caliphs, you might say they are wrong. You might say that, they are misportraying these individuals. But you cannot use it as a measure and a yardstick of Iman and Kufr to say that if you reject them, then you cannot be a Muslim. The yardstick of a Muslim will always have to remain that anyone who says La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah is a Muslim. And you cannot tell him you are not a Muslim and do takfir on him. The other issue, and there's just 2 or 3 more here, is that if you don't follow one of the 4 madhabs, if you are not a Shafi, Maliki, Hanafi or Hanbali, then you cannot be accepted as a Muslim. We cannot pray behind you. We cannot accept you as part of the Ummah. Once again, the issue is the same, that these madhahib came to form much later, during the time of the Banu Abbas. On what basis do you remove Muslims and say you cannot be a Muslim unless you follow this madhab? If you look at the history of madhahib, it's very interesting. In the early days of Islam, there were many individuals who had started their own school. For example, Hasan al-Basri had his own madhab and fiqh. Tabari, the author of Tariq al-Tabari, his name is Muhammad bin Jarir al-Tabari, he had started his own school. He was born a Shafi'i, but then he started his own school that was called the Jariri school because of his name, Ibn Jarir. And there is in Sunni literature that there was 11, 12, maybe 15 different schools. And when the government and the authorities saw this is getting out of hand and all sorts of schools are popping up and growing from all sorts of places, they clamped down on this and said only these 4 will be accepted as official schools and anything else is not acceptable. So this is an institutionalization from the governments of the time, but it is not from Sharia perspective. Otherwise, you don't have a case to argue why the schools of fiqh have to be 4 and not 3 or 5. So this is again no reason to say the Shi'as are not Muslims. There is another lie that is said about the Shi'as, that the Shi'as believe that revelation was supposed to come to Ali bin Abi Talib, but na'udhu billah, Jibreel did khiyana and sent it to Muhammad instead of Ali. This is a very popular misconception that you will find people quoting on the internet as well. I cannot emphasize enough that in the Shia madhab, we take our understanding of religion first and foremost from the Prophet ﷺ. The Imams alayhimus salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The Imams alayhimus salam, and I say this with utmost respect, do not have the authority to introduce anything to Sharia. They only tell you what is the Sharia of Muhammad. And that is why we insist on taking from them. They clearly says, Imam Sadiq clearly says, if I tell you anything and I don't tell you my source, then that is from my father Al-Baqir, who heard from his father Zainul Abidin, who heard from his father Al-Hussein, who heard from Amir al-Mu'mineen, who heard from Rasulullah, who heard from Jibreel, who heard from Allah. There is a golden chain, the Silsilatul Dhahabiyya, that goes all the way down. So the Shari', the legislator of Sharia is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we talk about the second caliph and some of the changes he made in Sharia, we shall revisit this issue to say that even the Prophet ﷺ, when people would ask him questions, he would not answer. He would wait until a verse was revealed. So the Sharia of Muhammad, when we say halalu Muhammad halal ila yawm al-qiyamah wa haramu Muhammad haram ila yawm al-qiyamah, what he made halal is halal to the day of judgment and haram, Sharia comes from him only. It is called Sharia Muhammadiyah. And we take this further down. Our maraja in the Sunni fiqh, when a Sunni Imam sometimes issues a fatwa, he will tell you this is my opinion or my fatwa. The Shia maraja do not have a right to express their opinion. They simply plumb everything they can find in Quran and Hadith to find what was the opinion of the Prophet, and if they can't, they look in the Hadith of the Imams and trace it back to the Prophet. When they can't find anything, then they don't tell you this is wajib haram. They tell you ihtiyat wajib, ihtiyat haram. Why ihtiyat? Because he does not have the authority to tell you, I say it's wajib or it's haram. So there is a direct line going back only and only to the Prophet ﷺ. Imam Ali alayhi salam used to say, Ana abdum min abidi Muhammad. I am just a humble slave from the slaves of Muhammad. When we praise the Ahlul Bayt, we attach to them, Ahlul Bayt means household. Household of who? Household of Muhammad. Hussein alayhi salam is precious to us. Why? Because he is grandson of Rasul. Ali is precious to us. Why? Because he is wasi of Rasul. Fatima alayhi salam is precious to us. Why? Because daughter of Rasul. So rest assured, there is no one more supreme in Islam to us beyond Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And the final one for tonight, there is this other story that has gone around, not so much now, that says the Shi'as are permitted to commit all kinds of sins on the day of Ashura. They get together in their mosques, men and women together, and they commit every sin you can think of together. And then they cry and beat themselves, and everything is forgiven. So we have this one day where there's a free license to do as you please, and you're forgiven at the end of the day. Now these are the sort of things that I'm saying are absolute misconceptions, lies, and it doesn't take anyone a lot to realize that these are untrue. However, there are other issues that are true differences between us, and we need to discuss them. Now, there is a few, not as many, with regards to the fiqh and ahkam issues. I will have to cover them at a high level tomorrow. And then, inshallah, we will then try and move towards now saying, if we have discussed our differences, what are the theological differences between the Shia and the Sunni madhab? And these theological differences, we want to argue to say, if the mainstream ummah were to adopt these principles of adala and imama, then we would all as an ummah be closer to Orthodox Islam. And then setting these two as a yardstick now, we will start reviewing the history from the time of the Prophet ﷺ's passing away to the early Khilafah, to the Umayyads, Abbasids, and we will bring that very quickly to the present day and the different Muslim governments, rules, movements, and see time and time again, is this point making sense to us as Muslims? That because we lack adala and imama, we are in the plight that we are in today. If you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. صلى الله وسلم عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك روحي وأرواح العالمين لك الفداء يا ليتنا كنا معكم أبا عبد الله فنفوز فوزا عظيما. Tonight is our fourth night in remembering Abu Abdullah al-Hussein as we wait in anticipation for the day of Ashura. And I mentioned in one of the early nights that because the angels and everything in the creation of Allah weeps for Hussein alayhi salam, it is our honor that we as sinners, as humble individuals, to be blessed with such opportunities that we can get together and shed some tears or listen to the Masaib of Hussein alayhi salam. This is truly a blessing of the mother of Hussein alayhi salam. You know, the Arbab of Aza in the past used to say that when you cry for Hussein, Fatima alayhi salam collects those tears in her rumal. And you may interpret this metaphorically, but we have many ahadith from the Imams to say. And the sixth Imam alayhi salam, when he used to hold a majlis, he used to say to the Shia that do not think that only I am present before you. Whenever you remember Hussein alayhi salam, then the spirit of Hussein alayhi salam is also present in that majlis. And that is why the Imams gave so much emphasis, because there is so much barakah and there is so much blessing and so much honor to those who are given this opportunity. Imam Rida alayhi salam used to invite great poets like Da'bil al-Khuzai, and where an imam should be sitting on the pulpit and others sitting down, the imam showing the respect of the Aza of Hussein, he would sit down and ask the poet to sit on the pulpit and say, read the Marthiyah of my Jad Hussein. We're told that in Medina, a man once came to Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam and said to him, Yabna Rasulillah, my daughter is getting married and I would love if you would participate at her wedding. The Imam said to him, I am in a state of mourning and I'm not able to come to this wedding. So he asked the Imam and said, Yabna Rasulillah, is there anything I can do that will bring you to my home and bless this occasion? And Imam al-Sajjad said to him, yes, if you keep the majlis of my Baba Hussein, I will come. This is how we started this tradition what we call shurwat-e-shadi, where at the start of a wedding we hold a majlis. And people are surprised, why do you cry before the start of a wedding? We cry because we want the spirit of Zainul Abidin to be at our weddings as well. So the man says, I kept the majlis of Hussein and I invited poets and people came, and the poet went up the pulpit and began reading Marthia, and people were crying, but my Imam was nowhere to be seen. He said, I thought to myself, it is not like my Imam to promise me and then not show up. So he went out looking, waiting at the door, when will Ali ibn al-Hussein come? He finally thought, let me go out to the road and see, perhaps he is approaching from outside. When he stepped outside his house, he found Imam al-Sajjad arranging the sandals of the Azadar. Mawla, you should be sitting inside. I kept this majlis so you will attend. And what did Zainul Abidin say to him? He said, you do not know the maqam of those who cry for Hussein. So an Imam serves the Azadar of Hussein. And that is why when you go to Karbala, many of you go for Arba'een, you see this ihtaram. Generally when you go around Iraq, you don't find people giving you this sort of hospitality. But when you walk from Najaf to Karbala, they want to polish your shoes, they want to press your feet. They beg you, Zair, please take something from me. Those who can't afford to give you food, they hold a box of tissue. Take something from me, ya Zair. Why? Because they know what they get back in return for this. This is the blessing of the Azadar. And that is why I say to those who volunteer at the Majlis of Hussein, you are blessed with this opportunity, but treat the Azadar of Hussein with immense respect, because they are not your guests, they are the guests of Zahra alayhi salam. Ajrukum ala Allah. Last night we began discussing the Ashab and Ansar of Hussein. Tomorrow night I have kept for perhaps the leader of the Ashab and Ansar, Habib ibn Madahir. But tonight I want to discuss different Ashab of Hussein and pay respect to them. There are so many of them and it is impossible to mention all of them. But you should try and make a point, perhaps on the day of Ashura, to at least read through the list and say salam to them. These were not ordinary people. Hussein alayhi salam personally handpicked every one of them. And when you read their history, they were eminent companions. They were leaders of their tribes. They were commanders in armies. They were people of nobility. They were people of very, very high rank. So great was their valor that we are told that 72 men were able to hold back an army of tens of thousands, 20, 30,000 men from the time of Fajr to the time of Asr. How long does it take to massacre and kill 72 men who are thirsty and hungry, many of them who are children, like Aun and Muhammad, babies? 72 are in that list. How long would it take to kill them? And they are hungry and thirsty for 3 days. They hold back an army like that from morning to the end of the day. And by the time of Dhuhr, there were still 33 men left with Hussein. 15 Ashab and 18 from the Banu Hashim. This tells you that these were not ordinary people. When we look at the ziyarah that we recite, ziyarah al-Warith for example, look at how we describe the Ashab. Karbala was a land that was considered to be cursed. And anybody who stopped there suffered great afflictions. And they attributed it to the land of Karbala because there was something immense waiting to happen. But today Karbala is Karbala Mu'alla. Al-Mu'alla, we are told that Karbala is a part of Jannah. There are riwayat to say that when Allah will destroy this earth at the end of times, He will remove Karbala and keep it separate. And then He will place it where He places Jannah. This is Karbala. How did Karbala go from being a land that is cursed to a land that is so blessed? It is the blood of Hussein, isn't it? But it is also the blood of his ashab and ansar. Why? Because in ziyarah we say, when we say Assalamu alayka ya ansar al-Hussein and ya ashab al-Hussein, we say Tibtum wa tabatil ardu allati fiha dufintum. Purified are you, and purified has become the land in which you were buried because of you. فَيَا لَيْتَنَا كُنَّا مَعَكُمْ. If only we had been with you. فَنَفُوزَ فَوْزًا عَظِيمًا. Then what great and lofty statuses we too would have acquired. So when I think of the ashab of Hussein, I imagine Hussein alayhi salam walking in an open field that is covered with weeds. And he selectively goes and picks the roses one by one from amongst those weeds. There were many who joined Imam al-Hussein from Mecca, going towards Kufa, because they thought they were going to a place where they will have a lot to benefit from. But when they found that Hussein alayhi salam is heading to a desert, they left Imam Hussein. But there were many who were not with Hussein alayhi salam, and he brought them towards him, one by one. He wrote letters to them. He wrote a letter to Habib. And there were some in whom he saw the potential. They were opposed to Hussein, but he changed their hearts and he brought them towards himself. One amongst them is Zuhair ibn al-Qayn al-Bajali. During the time of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, the Muslims were largely categorized and grouped as being Alawi or Uthmani. Zuhair was known as an Uthmani. And it so happened that when the qafil of Imam al-Hussein was moving towards Kufa, Zuhair was also traveling with his family. He had his servant, his wife, and a small qafila traveling. Now he knew this was the qafila of Hussein, but he did not want to meet Hussein because he was opposed to Hussein at the time. So what Zuhair did was, wherever Hussein stopped, he did not stop. He kept moving. And wherever he saw Hussein alayhi salam moving, he stopped, to avoid meeting Imam al-Hussein. Now look, when Allah has chosen you because of the purity of your heart. We said last night that when we say, would we have been with Hussein, we should look at what are the qualities in these people that we can take. In Hur we saw the quality was ihtaram for Fatima. That if you have a deep, deep-seated love for the daughter of the Prophet, that will save you and place you with the potential to be on the Ansar of the Mahdi, inshaAllah. We shall talk of Abu Thumama, and you will see that being particular about your salat, not only praying, but praying on time, is another quality that could qualify you to have been in Karbala. With Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, we shall see the benefit a man has in life when he is blessed with a spouse who does not hold him back, but encourages him and pushes him in matters of faith and religion. And this could be the other way as well. And we shall see this with Habib as well tomorrow. There came a point at which Zuhair ibn al-Qayn stopped his qafila and Hussein alayhi salam stopped. As he sat in his tent, we are told at that point Zuhair had heard of all the politics and he was so fed up. He had hung his sword up. He was now feeling like an old man, tired, fatigued, confused, perplexed. When a horseman showed up outside his tent, when Zuhair stepped out of his tent, the man said to him, Ana Baridul Hussein. I am the messenger of Hussein, and I have brought a letter for you. Zuhair reads the letter. It says it is from Hussein bin Ali. Oh Zuhair, I would like to speak to you. He says to the messenger, go back to Hussein, I will think about it. He goes back inside. Now look at how Allah can bless you. His wife says to him, oh Zuhair, what is this? He says, it is a letter from Hussein. What is Hussein asking for you? He says, Hussein wants to meet me. She says, what are you going to do about it, O Zuhair? He says, I do not intend to go and meet him. She says to him, O Zuhair, he is the grandson of your Prophet. O Zuhair, if nothing else, he is the son of Zahra. Go, O Zuhair, what will you lose? Just go speak to him. You don't have to do what he says. Just go listen to what he has to say. With this encouragement from his spouse, Zuhair gets on his horse. He rides towards the camp of Hussein. There is no record in history of what it is that Hussein said to Zuhair. But what history tells us is that when Zuhair came back, he was a completely changed man. There was light radiating from the face of Zuhair. Zuhair, who had become an old man, was now sitting upright on his horse. Zuhair had become young again. Zuhair's blood was raging. Zuhair came to his wife beaming and smiling. Zuhair was with such excitement, he pulled his sword out. Zuhair said to his wife, "Go back to your family. I have freed you." He said to his servant, "I have freed you." He gave his wealth away. His wife said to him, "What has happened to you, O Zuhair?" What has happened to Zuhair? Zuhair has fallen in love with Hussein. Zuhair leaves his camp. He goes back, he goes out and meets Hussein. He joins the qafila of Hussein. He goes with Hussein to Karbala. Zuhair is one of those eminent people who fight in the battle after Dhuhr. For every one of the ashab and ansar of Hussein, Hussein went out to the battlefield. He placed their head on his lap. He gave them time and spoke to them softly. He wiped the sand and blood from their faces. He asked them if they had any wasiyah, and all of them looked up. And how blessed they were to see the face of their Imam and to have their heads on his lap. But alas for Hussein, when he would be left alone, there would be no lap on which the head of Hussein would be left. Our salams to Zuhair ibn al-Qayn al-Bajali. The other companion of Hussein is Abu Thumama as-Saydawi. Abu Thumama, on the day of Ashura, when it was the time of Dhuhr, he looked up and saw it's time of Dhuhr. He said, "Ya Aba Abdullah, it is the time of Dhuhr. Our hearts desire that we pray behind you once more." Imam al-Hussein blesses Abu Thumama and says, "Dhakarta salat, ja'alaka Allahu min al-musallin." Look at how beautifully an Imam blesses his ashab and his ansar. "O Abu Thumama, you have remembered salat at a time such as this. May Allah raise you amongst those who pray salat." Abu Thumama was one of those who prayed with Hussein. When he lost his life as well, Hussein blessed him as well and said, "O Abu Thumama, you remembered salat. Go, my jad will quench your thirst. You will enter paradise as well before me." Another eminent ashab of Hussein is Abis. Abis bin Shabib. Abis bin Abi Shabib ash-Shakiri. Abis was a man from Kufa. Abis was a man who had fought in Siffin with Ali. Abis was a man who had an injury on his forehead that was left over from Siffin. When Muslim bin Aqil came to Kufa, Abis was one of those who stood with Habib ibn Madahir and delivered a lecture to Muslim telling him to call Hussein, because of which 18,000 people pledged allegiance to Muslim bin Aqil. When Muslim ibn Aqil wrote a letter to Hussein and said, "Mawla, come to Kufa," he gave this letter to Abis. Abis was the one who took the letter to Makkah to Hussein. Abis traveled with Hussein to Karbala. This Abis was so valiant a warrior that the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad feared him. And we are told that when Abis went to the battlefield, Umar ibn Sa'ad said to the people, "O people, this is a lion that has come. This is a man who fought in the battle of Siffin. You will not be able to challenge him." Abis kept calling out to them and say, "What do you fear? Come and fight me. I am thirsty for 3 days." No one dared to come and fight Abis. When Abis saw no one coming towards him, he removed his helmet, he removed his armor. He said, "Come fight me then." And some of the reports say Abis removed his shirt as well. As he charged towards the enemy, someone said to him, "O Abis, you have removed your helmet, you have removed your armor. Have you gone mad? Have you gone insane?" And the words of Abis have become immortalized. When you go to Karbala, you will find this everywhere. Abis said, "Yes, I have gone mad. Hubbul Hussein ajannani. The love of Hussein has made me mad. I am now madly in love with Hussein." Abis charged into the army and killed 200 of them. Umar ibn Sa'ad said, "Attack him from all sides." When they killed Abis, he is one of those shaheed they beheaded immediately. As soon as they beheaded him, they began fighting for the head of Abis to say, "We killed Abis." Umar ibn Sa'ad said, "It is a lie. No one man could have killed Abis." Our salams to Abis. Another ashab of Hussein was Sa'id bin Abdullah. Sa'id bin Abdullah was that companion of Hussein that when Hussein stood to pray Salatul Dhuhr, Sa'id bin Abdullah stood in front of Hussein. As the arrows came flying towards Hussein,
Sa'id bin Abdullah kept taking these arrows on his chest. We are told that Sa'id took as many as he could take. He did not fall as long as Hussein was praying. When Aba Abdullah al-Hussein said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, then Sa'id bin Abdullah fell at the feet of Hussein. Hussein took the head of Sa'id. He placed it on his lap. Sa'id opened his eyes and looked at Hussein. He asked only one question to Hussein. He said, Sayyidi wa Mawlai, hal wafaytu ila ahdi? Oh Hussein, have I been faithful and loyal to my ahd? Yes, O Sa'id, you have been faithful. O Sa'id, you stood before me, you will enter Jannah before me. Go Sa'id, my Jad will quench your thirst. One of our salams on Sa'id bin Abdullah, one of the most eminent companions of Hussein after Habib was Muslim bin Awsajah. Muslim bin Awsajah was one of those who went after Dhuhr as well. When Muslim bin Awsajah fell from his horse and called, Ya Aba Abdullah adrikni, Hussein ran out to the body of Muslim. Habib went out with Hussein. Now the head of Muslim is on the lap of Hussein. Habib sat beside Muslim. Hussein is rubbing the face of the sand and blood from Muslim's face. Hussein is combing the hair of Muslim. Habib sits beside Muslim and says, Oh Muslim, I am following you shortly after. But oh Muslim, if you have any wasiyah, give me your wasiyah, I will fulfill it. But Muslim points to Hussein. He says, Oh Habib, usikum bihada. Oh Habib, as long as you are alive, let no one hurt my Hussein. Oh Habib, let no injury fall my Hussein. As long as there is breath left in your body, Habib promised Muslim, oh Muslim, with every breath in my body, as long as I am there, no one will hurt your Imam. But I would say to Muslim, oh Muslim, come at the time of Asr and look at your Hussein. You will see Hussein rolling in his own blood on the hot sands of Karbala. Zainab will be standing on a mount calling out, why does not the heavens fall? Yabna Saad, the grandson of the Prophet is being killed. Oh Muslim, you will see horses trampling the body of the son of Zahra. There will be no one to say, this is the body of the grandson of your Prophet. Wa Husayna, wa Madluma, wa Ghariba, Matame Hussein. Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein.